Kagumire. I'm an editor for African Feminism, among other things that I do. And my pronouns are she, her. You're welcome this session. Like Sanshan said, we really have brought together a diverse group of feminists from different African countries with different experiences, and we really want that to reflect in our reflections, yeah? And I wanted us to recognize that even as we go into this session, we meet at a very, very difficult time for many people on the African continent. We have many countries facing war, conflict, floods, famine, dictatorships. We have more than ever highest numbers of displacement on the continent, from Congo to Sudan to Ethiopia, Somalia, from Chad, the whole of Sahel. We recognize those experiences and we stand in that to really reflect then what happens to the feminist struggle on the continent when we are seeing this kind of experience that we are facing. We also recognize that we are living towards a very multipolar world, a polarized geopolitical environment, where Africa has once again been put at the center of geopolitical wars and, you know, with all the imperialist capture of our states, of our lives. We need to recognize that. So our experiences are rooted in recognition of the fact that Africa is at a very, very precarious situation in the world. From the COVID experience, what we experienced, for example, to the current proxy wars we see in the continent, and the struggle for our resources, our bodies and resources, the struggle is on. So we have to bring those experiences to light at this conference, that even if we talk about the internet, our realities of the internet are very, very precarious. Then we will reflect on how does that reflect then as we try to navigate the internet. And also as feminists, we also recognize that particularly, there's a rise of anti-rights movements, very well funded and coordinated, that are trying to take away the little rights that African women have and other minoritized people have fought so hard for, that our dignity is being debated in parliaments, in the streets, by the state, and we are saying that we will be continuing to fight back. So that's why this is what the panel is about, and you hear more from our esteemed panelists. Yeah? Also, before I continue, I also recognize that at the same time we are seeing governments, our own governments, while we serve the rhetoric of borderless Africa, one passport Africa, we see that many African people are very restricted. Their mobility is restricted even within the African borders. And indeed, we couldn't bring one of our esteemed panelists, Rim Abbas, from Sudan, because she was being asked for police clearance and all sorts of things. So you can imagine to be asked that when you're trying to survive a war and you want to tell your experience, the experience of Sudanese women and other people, but you're being asked to produce police report in a collapsing state. So we have to challenge these kind of rules that remain an impediment and really add to our suffering. So I wanted to recognize that we would have loved to see her here, and we are sad that she couldn't make it, and we'll continue to fight for a borderless Africa. Yeah. So without any further delay, I would like to bring forward our keynote speaker. So we decided to have a keynote. The format is a keynote, panel, and then we'll also have other conversations outside the panel. So our keynote speaker, Kiki Modi. Kiki Modi is an investigative journalist, a documentary filmmaker, and an advocate for gender equality. She's the founder and creative director of Document Women, among many other things. If you don't know Kiki Modi online, I don't know, you're missing out. You need to start today, you know. Kiki, we are very honored. We recognize your fight. We recognize your work. And that's why we are very happy to listen to you to open this session for us. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here in Dhaka this morning to speak among all these beautiful faces an accomplished African feminist. A round of applause for yourself, please. Today, we're here to reflect on gendered misinformation and disinformation in today's world. My hope is that before the end of today, we're not just analyzing, but we're strategizing, resisting, and reclaiming our narratives. There is an urgent need for us to reflect on how disinformation campaigns and misinformation in general have adapted to digital. As many of us here probably know, whether online, at home, on the streets, or in the news, attack on truth, dignity, and safety are intensifying. In the recent years, disinformation has emerged as one of the most potent weapons against democracy, human rights, and equality. This information disorder, as people like to call it, has come in form of attacks against journalists, election tampering, even feminist reputational damage. I'm sure many of you here have experienced it. I have personal experiences with disinformation campaign. Whatever the disguise it wears tomorrow, information disorder threatens to undermine our collective progress, exacerbating the violence, marginalization, and injustice that feminists have fought against for generations. Misinformation spreads quickly, but disinformation is a deliberate falsehood designed to deceive, and this can be particularly dangerous. Its effect is felt very acutely in regions like Africa, where our digital infrastructures are still developing rapidly, yet regulatory mechanisms are often very weak. And truth itself has become a battleground. This crisis is not gender neutral, but at its core, gendered mis- and disinformation is about control and maintaining patriarchal structures that keep women in positions of subservience and silence. Through smear campaigns, distorted narratives, and weaponization of social media, women, especially feminist leaders and activists, are targeted in ways that threaten not only our reputations, but our safety and our autonomy. If you're on Twitter, or X as they call it now, you've probably experienced a shift in how conversations around gender, women, patriarchy, misogyny are being framed today. These tactics reinforce harmful gender stereotypes, depicting women as unreliable, overly emotional, or even lacking credibility. Online, we see viral posts and memes that discredit women's voices, women's leadership, women's agency, and they use these violent, sexist, and racist rhetorics. But this is not even a new phenomenon. It's a digital manifestation of what we are, deeply ingrained patriarchal attitudes that have been a part of us for a very long time. Across Africa, women's leadership has been consistently undermined, from local to national. If you think of the women politicians who are targeted with sexist propaganda, think of the female journalists, think of the human rights defenders. They are harassed for their works, or the everyday woman who just faces cyberbullying and online abuse simply for having a voice. The goal of these tactics is not just to undermine individuals, it's to deter an entire movement, to silence the feminist activism at a time when it is more crucial than ever. Here in Africa, the intersection of gender and race even complicates this further. Disinformation campaigns not only target women disproportionately, but affect Black African women or women from marginalized ethnic groups. The legacy of colonialism, which sought to dehumanize African women, still haunts us today in how we're represented and attacked online and offline. Black African women have historically been subjected to harmful tropes: the hypersexualized body, the submissive wife, the docile laborer. Now, modern times, the stereotypes have continued to be weaponized, with digital platforms amplifying old racialized tropes under the guise of humor, politics, or even concern. These racial and gendered stereotypes further perpetuate social, economic, and political exclusion. They work to delegitimize African women's powerful and essential contributions in their communities, their countries, and on the global stage. Yet, amidst this hostile environment, African women are fighting back. Feminist movements across the continent are pushing back against these toxic narratives with truth, resistance, and solidarity. From Lagos to Namibia, from Egypt to Dakar, movements like Shut It All Down, Mosque Me Too, Say Her Name, Sex for Grades, these are symbolic of how African women use the power of digital media to draw attention to violence, hold governments accountable, and demand justice for women and girls. African feminists are creating safe spaces online for women to speak freely, and I'm proud of that especially. We're challenging patriarchal norms and engaging in critical discourse that would empower rather than oppress. By doing so, we are not only resisting the forces that seek to disempower us, but we're actively shaping the future of digital activism. But these efforts must be sustained, they must be supported, and they must be amplified. The stakes are high, and our collective effort must extend beyond the virtual world. I'm hoping that the panels today will discuss a long list of strategies, but allow me to name 5. Digital literacy education is very important today. Regulation and policy reform must be head-on. Solidarity and coalition building is how we survive. I don't know how I would exist without my feminist sisters. Please clap for yourselves. Thank you so much. And investing in mental health and wellness. We live in a world that gaslights us. Like, we are prone to, intimate partner abuse, but we're also prone to abuse from our governments even. And most of all, we need to amplify these counter-narratives. There are people who are anti-misogyny, and those voices must be louder than the disrespect itself. In a world where misinformation is used as a tool of oppression, truth becomes an act of resistance. We stand here today as African feminists committed to challenging the forces of patriarchy, racism, and disinformation that seek to divide, silence, and destroy. We are more than the narratives imposed on us. We are the narrators of our own stories. From the online world to the streets, from our homes to the halls of power, we will continue to fight, we will continue to resist. Together, our voices are unstoppable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kiki, for that powerful opening of our panel. I also wanted to recognize Kiki's work and the many Nigerian feminists and women that challenge power every day, but also particularly the work we saw during End SARS. Continue the fight, we are with you. So now I have the pleasure of inviting our panelists. We have 4 panelists today. As Ayla earlier said, we were unable to bring Reem to be with us here to narrate for us what is going on in Sudan, but we know what is going on in Sudan. Please keep Sudan on your radar, keep eyes on Sudan, because it's very, very important now more than ever that we do not keep quiet. We continue to lend our voices to each other because our existence relies on that, So I would like to invite our panelists. On the next stage, we'll have Henda. Henda is my long-term friend and comrade from Tunisia. We met shortly after the Tunisian revolution, and we were young and passionate and writing as journalists. We thought we'd bring change. We'll see how far, we'll hear how far we have done with that. Henda is a gender expert, and she's a sociology researcher. She's also a political activist in Tunisia. She runs the first intersectional feminist school in Tunisia in honor of the activist Lina Ben Mehni. Merci. Yes, so Henda is doing amazing work in Tunisia under very difficult circumstances, under a dictatorship out there. So we'll be hearing more from her experience with mis and disinformation, and how we can be of solidarity to the people and activists in Tunisia. Next on our panel list is somebody whose work I admire so much, Fatou Walker Sambe. Bienvenue. Thank you so much. We are very happy that you're here with us. Fatou is a Senegalese journalist, feminist activist, and also founder of Walker TV, which is a feminist platform. That's where we need to be, on those platforms, please, and Fatou has already taken a step forward. Apart from her work as a journalist and being a vocal on our issues, Fatou is also a municipal councillor in the commune of Beacon Nord. Viva, viva! So Fatou, you're very welcome, and she also leads the collective of feminists here in Senegal. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. I will try. Réseau des Féministes au Sénégal. It's a good collective of Senegalese feminists. If you're looking to learn more about the Senegalese feminist struggles, Fatou will introduce us to that, and you can continue to be in touch with Fatou and many others. Yeah? Fatou, you're welcome. We can't wait to hear from you. Yes, and next is our co-host, Nancy Houston. Nancy, I've known Nancy for a long time from the baby steps of feminists in Kenya. We have collaborated on many things, and we are collaborating on this panel. We've been able to work together to bring this panel to life. Nancy Houston is a co-founder of Feminists in Kenya, which is a diverse social movement of young feminists and queer activists who are committed to amplifying feminist discourse. Nancy has background in international human rights law and is a feminist writer and researcher. You're welcome, Nancy. Last but not least on the panel, I would like to welcome Sarai Chisara. Sarai is a human rights lawyer, so we are protected a little bit on this panel. Yeah, we have our lawyers on standby. And she's a gender rights activist from Malawi. She's a founder and director of Gender and Justice Unit in Malawi. We've worked together on a few things with Sarai on online violence against women, and we'll hear more about that. Yeah? A clap for our panelists. Yes, we have a very powerful panel from all corners of Africa. You know, we walk the talk when we talk about diversity, intersectionality. We walk the talk, so we'll be happy to listen to them. So I'll start with you, Henda. Would you talk more about your work and how your work relates to today's topic on mis and disinformation? Yeah. Thank you.
Hello. Good. First, thank you for the invitation, and I'm very, very happy to be here with you. Actually, I have to say that I define myself as a feminist activist, but also as a citizen from Africa, as an activist from Africa who fights for an Africa of solidarity, and for an Africa of tolerance and justice and social justice. So yeah, that's why I'm also happy to be with all these African feminists and to have this African feminist energy. So I would like to say that now in Tunisia, and we all know that Tunisia, as well as a country in North Africa, is also affected by this new wave of extreme right politics and of neoliberalism and slash neoconservatism, is facing a new dictatorship that is targeting directly feminists, but not only feminists. When you say feminist slash women, we're also talking about all minorities. So the disinformation and the misinformation in Tunisia, led by these extreme groups and identity, they are going through, for example, the gender or anti-gender concepts, but also targeting the anti-migration, the migration, for example, rights. And we know that these entities are working and are coordinating with international forces, and we can see it through, for example, the right wing in Europe, for instance, Italy, France, or Germany, that are giving a lot of not only legitimacy to these extremist groups, but also funds. Also, they are providing them with arguments, with discourse, with the political discourse. They are working together in making like a new hegemony and a new ideology of what is, for example, to be patriotic, what is to be a good citizen in the world. So the definition is, for example, to be xenophobic, to be sexist, to be homophobic, to be racist, and to close the borders. So there is a lot of fights at the same time. We are, as feminists now, we are not fighting only for our basics rights, like sexual or health rights, but also we are fighting for our existence. And we know that as feminists, we cannot fight alone. We have to fight also with different communities that are invisible, for example, migrants in Tunisia. And I have to also remind that Tunisia, as a country in North Africa, is also like responsible for what is happening now to migrants. But it's not isolated. There is like a tight coordination happening now between Tunisia, Libya, and Morocco, and also Egypt in closing the borders. And this coordination is going and is funded by the European Union. So we are talking about a new or a neo-colonialism going together with the sexism, with the neoconservatism, and with neoliberalism. We know that these strategies, the aim of these strategies is to make our lives more precarious, and things are getting really, really worse now. Since the new government is in power. For example, the misinformation, unfortunately, in Tunisia is not only on internet. It's also, we can see it on TV, on also political and official institution, like the presidency of the republic is doing misinformation and having a hate speech and a speech of fascism, saying that migrants, for example, women, feminists and migrants are doing a complot, for example, against Tunisians. And they are criminals, they are the enemies of the nation. So we are not only fighting like groups, anonymous groups on Facebook or on Twitter, but we are like in a high level of criminalization of activism, criminalization also of minority identities and colors. So racism in Tunisia is not only like a hate speech or a discourse, it's an institutional and structures in the state and in the deep state. Black people, even Tunisian black people, are not recognized as citizens in Tunisia. And women are second gender. Of course, we know LGBTQI people are not considered as individuals and at citizens in Tunisia. So all these minorities actually are under attack, and I think that now, of course, when the crisis started in Tunisia, we were, as feminists, the first who started a campaign, a counter campaign to counter these attacks, and we were leading solidarity groups to help migrants, especially women and kids. And then suddenly, the state again started to put everyone in jail, and I have to remind that now, since many years, since even the independence, we have the higher number of female activists in jail, and black female activists, Tunisian female activists. So if I still have time to continue with, okay, we'll come back for the solutions. Okay.
Thank you so much, Henda, to highlight that intersection, right? Because, oftentimes, the tag on migrants is like sub-Saharan migrants. But when you start to put, where does sub-Saharan Africa start, right? This imperial labors of the continent that persist and also feed to the dehumanization of people, and also lack of recognition that they're actually black people in Tunisia. They are Tunisian citizens who are black. So when you start to put the divide, then you actually create an environment where the state and other actors can really criminalize identities within those borders. So thank you so much for giving us that wrap on migration, because migration is a big issue of our time, right? A lot of Africans are on the move, many of them forced migration. So very, very important to hear how then disinformation affects them before or after they're on the move or in various destination countries. It's very, very important. Thank you, Henda. We'll go to Fatou. Is everybody having their interpretation? Yeah, Fatou is going to speak in French. You have everybody's set? Okay, good. So Fatou, as a journalist and a feminist running a feminist media, would like to hear your challenges, your experience with that, and the challenge with the disinformation within, whether within the Senegalese setting or major online. Thank you, Fatou.
Allô? C'est bon? Ok. Merci Rose. Merci aux organisatrices de cette activité. Merci pour l'opportunité que vous nous donnez de partager nos expériences. Et c'est bon? Tout le monde a son casque? Pas encore. De toute façon, il y a 2 casques ici. Il y a 2 casques ici. Si vous en avez besoin. Alors. C'est bon. Oui, je pense que les médias féministes jouent un rôle crucial dans la lutte contre la désinformation sexiste. Et en tant que journaliste et militante féministe sénégalaise, j'ai vu de près à quel point les récits dominants véhiculés par les médias traditionnels peuvent souvent perpétuer des stéréotypes de genre et renforcer les normes patriarcales et propager les messages qui minimisent les luttes des femmes et plus particulièrement la lutte des féministes. Donc ce sont des récits biaisés qui créent parfois un climat de désinformation et qui non seulement déforment la réalité, mais aussi dans de nombreux cas justifient ou banalisent les violences et les injustices que subissent les femmes. Donc c'est comme ça que nous avons eu, nous, en tant que journalistes féministes, l'idée de créer un média féministe, Waha TV, parce que tout simplement les médias féministes sont essentiels parce qu'ils offrent une plateforme où les voix des femmes peuvent s'exprimer sans être filtrés par les prismes du patriarcat. Mais aussi, ces médias ne se contentent pas de contester la désinformation, mais ils réécrivent les récits en mettant en avant des perspectives féministes qui remettent en question les normes sexistes. Donc, ils permettent également de visibiliser les réalités des femmes, qu'il s'agisse des violences de genre, des inégalités professionnelles ou des obstacles systémiques que nous rencontrons quotidiennement en matière de désinformation. Et un des défis majeurs est la propagation déjà de fausses nouvelles, de fausses informations qui renforcent l'idée que les revendications féministes sont exagérées ou non fondées. Et les médias féministes sont là pour véritablement rétablir la vérité, pour informer et pour éduquer le public sur les questions de genre avec rigueur et précision. Ils offrent des analyses critiques et un espace pour discuter de sujets souvent marginalisés par les grands médias. Donc ces plateformes nous permettent, nous, en tant que militantes féministes, en tant que créatrices et créateurs d'espaces féministes, de construire des solidarités internationales en mettant en lumière des luttes locales et globales, mais également elles amplifient les voix des femmes du monde entier en s'assurant que ces récits ne soient pas effacés ou marginalisés et en créant des réseaux d'échange et de soutien. Et donc les médias féministes sont une arme essentielle dans la lutte contre la désinformation sexiste, car ils remettent en cause les récits dominants, rétablissent la vérité et offrent aux femmes un espace pour se rencontrer, se mobiliser dans un monde saturé de fausses informations et de stéréotypes de genre. Et ils représentent également un rempart nécessaire à la justice et à l'égalité des sexes. Parce que nous, on se rend compte, par exemple, qu'ici au Sénégal, les médias traditionnels ne nous donnent pas l'espace que nous souhaitons. Et quand nous parlons de féminisme, souvent, vous voyez tout ce qui se passe à travers le monde. Quand on parle de féminisme, les gens ils vont avec leurs idées, avec leurs propres idées. Donc créer des espaces, en tant que militante d'abord, des espaces concrets, mais aussi créer des espaces dans l'espace numérique aussi, pour nous imposer, mais également pour donner notre version des faits. Et donc ici au Sénégal, il y a les collectifs, il y a les réseaux, il y a également des médias, il n'y a pas que Wahatib, il y a d'autres initiatives de ce genre, parce que nous savons que l'espace numérique est à occuper et qu'il y a beaucoup d'informations ou de fausses informations sexistes. Et donc nous, en tant que militantes, on se mobilise pour essayer de rétablir la vérité. Merci.
A round of applause for Fatou. Thank you so much. You inspire the fact that you can take that step, put up a TV in a world where, you know, the public discourse does not favor women's voices and other marginalized identities. So thank you for your work and sharing with us that experience. We'll move to Nancy. Nancy, working with feminists in Kenya, I am sure all of us have followed what has happened in Kenya, right? Do we know what was happening in Kenya? Yes. You see, thanks to people like Nancy and all those collectives that have been really bringing us the truth to the foreground. So Nancy, would like to hear from you about your work with feminists in Kenya and how you have been fighting back all different backlash and the realities there, but also how then mis and disinformation, you encounter it and how you counter it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosebell. Hi, everyone. I would like to respond to that question by reflecting on two key points. And the first point, I want to provide a power analysis of the internet. And I'm genuinely curious when I think about this question, because what did we think would happen if a white supremacist, heteropatriarchal, heteronormative, and a system gave us the internet? This is a system that has proven time and time again that it is meant to marginalize people. This is a system that has proven that it works to other people. It is the system versus others, right? This is a system that has proven throughout history that its work is to conquer, to divide, to maim, and it's simply working the way it was designed to work. It's working to exhaust us, right? And so if you ask me personally, as a feminist, why this topic is important is because we are all drowning under this system. We are all drowning under the weight of this capitalist crippling system. And how is this system, if you look at the trajectory again of global politics, with the rise of anti-rights and anti-gender movements, with the rise of right-wing governments, there seems to be a twisted scramble and frenzy for power. It's like the system feels like their power is running away from them. They feel like they are losing their power. And so they're scrambling to reassert their dominance. They want us to know as marginalized people that we are in charge. We are in control. You are not in control. And so how are they doing this? The system, together with its actors, are using the internet as a platform to spread misinformation and disinformation. They've gone on the internet and they've drawn a hard line. It's a war zone on the internet. And they're saying, you know what? We are going to use the internet to spread false narratives about marginalized groups of people. We are going to use the internet to humiliate black women. We are going to use the internet to attack the self-esteem of African women. We are going to use the internet to push back on the gains made on sexual, reproductive, and health rights of women. We are going to use the internet to conflate the identity of sexual and gender minorities with pedophilia so that they are perceived as sexual deviants. We are going to use the internet to attack trans children, trans women, trans people, and we are certainly going to use the internet to attack feminists and feminist movements by coming up with weird content like traditional wives and femininity content. And if you look at this kind of content, it's very inviting, right? It's very warm, it's very gentle, it's very sweet to look like. And the system has recognized that we are tired under the capitalism. All of us are tired. And so they want to manipulate our minds. They want to curb our ability to critically think so that we do not critically think when we engage with this 1 minute femininity and traditional wives content. We don't think that, you know what, this was just a second of this content. They didn't show me the background. They didn't show me that I will be pushed further in the margins as a woman if I stay at home. And I'm certainly not saying that being a stay-at-home mom is bad. If it's your choice, it's okay. But this, if you look at the content that we are being spread, it's very nonsensical. There's no critical thinking, and that's my thing with this system. And so for me, again, I insist that we must, as feminists, push back completely, push back. Don't stop, continue resisting, because this system is out to get us. It is out to drown us. And we are drowning men, we are drowning feminists, and we are clutching at straws. So that is the first point that I wanted to talk about. And the second point that I wanted to talk about, why I think that this topic today is important, is because it's forcing us to humanize feminist activists. And when I thought about this topic, I wanted to position and center feminist activists as primary victims of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. You know, as feminists, we are so used to being considered resilient and strong because we are always on the front line. And it's a bit dehumanizing, right? It's dehumanizing to be considered strong all the time and resilient all the time. Yeah, but I remember one time when I logged in on TikTok, the first TikTok that I saw was a TikTok making fun of a black woman's hair. And it had been rubber stamped by over 500K people. And I opened the comments, and people were laughing, and it was some sort of a dark humor joke that people found funny. In that moment, I was not a feminist activist who is strong and resilient and loud and vibrant. I was just a black woman facing racialized violence online. And it's the same for sex workers who are feminist activists. It's the same for queer people who are feminist activists. It's the same for disabled people who are feminist activists. When you see a tweet has gone viral and it's supposed to be funny in a dark way, you're not some strong person who's just encountered a funny tweet. You've experienced homophobic violence, right? And we need to call it what it is. It's technology-facilitated gender-based violence. It is not an occupational hazard. It is not something that happens because we are feminist organizers. It is something that happens because the system wants it to happen like that. It is something that happens because this system is meant to reproduce violence. All right, that's what I wanted to reflect on.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you. Amazing. And make this the norm. So make people even scared of being online, because when you wake up every day and your timeline has entirely changed, they're pushing your thinking towards a certain direction, you will realize that what your initial thought of what you want to engage in is basically gone, because your timeline looks different, drawing you in very clickbait kind of conversations instead of having real discourse on real issues that we are facing. And also disinformation relies on emotions, already debated identities, debated ideas about power. There's power, there's someone with power. It is giving those with power to continue to have power over others. It's not content from marginalized folks, right? I know all of you have seen, we are trying to be demure, cutesy, and mindful. And you saw how people were pushing back, oh, we don't want to see this, we don't want to hear this. It's because it's coming from a marginalized person, and that now they want to bury it really quick because they realize the face behind, the human behind that trend. But every day we are consuming trends from other people. So you have to realize whose trend is this, and who is allowed to actually have a trend, right? We saw that kind of backlash about very demure, but we keep it demure either way, right? So also just a bit of Nancy was talking about clear examples why we're having this conversation. Disinformation is a very active tool being deployed. I'm from Uganda. If I ask all of you what you've heard of Uganda lately, it would be a bit dark, right? It's unfortunate. Uganda passed an anti-homosexuality law last year. Is it last year? Yeah, and there's been an onslaught on violence against queer people in Uganda, and we denounce that every day, in every platform. But also that violence wasn't just in our parliament, or in churches, by religious leaders. We saw national hysteria, You'd hope that people who are living through a 39-year-old dictatorship would have better things to fight. But unfortunately, we are fighting queer people, right? And disinformation was at the heart of this, right? Driving emotions. So members of parliament, they wake up, groups, they say, oh, a child was molested in this school. This school is teaching kids how to be homosexual. Like, all driving on people's emotions. And at the end of the day, you try to fact check that statement that the whole country is debating. There is no fact. There is no evidence, and no one is interested in facts. So the fight we are in is a fact-based fight, and there is no one interested in the fight. It is everybody running high on emotions, setting up entire populations to debate a part of people they don't even know, right? They don't fully even know about. But we have months of debating queer people in Uganda, culminating into the anti-homosexuality law. The struggle is still on. But this is how disinformation works. And also another example of this kind of disinformation, towards the end of last year, Ethiopia overnight, There were accounts on TikTok gaining millions of followers. They were hosting lives trying to rile up Ethiopia to attack anyone looking feminine and masculine. They were like, they look like this, find them. And that had repercussions in real time. People were being attacked on the street for looking a certain way. From TikTok in real time to attacks in Ethiopia on queer, not only queer people, just you could be anybody. People would attack you because they have this idea of what femininity and womanhood, manhood should look like. And this is how, and it took because I know many activists in Ethiopia, it took a long time to, even TikTok couldn't put down these accounts. They were profiting off that kind of rage, right? So all these platforms are profiting off this rage. They are not putting down the accounts. They are letting that disinformation factory continue, And unfortunately for the people being discussed or any other person, they are real life, threats and displacement. You could die. We saw that. And again, a country at war, Ethiopia, you'd think it to have better things to talk about. Displacement, people starving in camps, a huge number of refugees. That's what we should be talking about. But again, queer people being debated in the middle of all these crises. There has to be somebody behind that. And we have to find that somebody. We have to talk about them. Yeah? That's why we're here. Thank you. I wanted to share those two examples that I know very well before I go to Sarai. Sarai, you have worked on generally on gender-based violence, with online aspects and technology-facilitated violence. Can you share with us your work and experience related to disinformation and what kind of pushback we are looking at? Thank you.
Thank you, Rosebell. And what an honor to be on this panel today and in the presence of so many fierce feminists and activists. I just want to share that the Gender and Justice Unit in Malawi, which I head, one of our strategies was to work very closely with young feminist leaders and old feminist leaders, bringing them together at the table in an intergenerational discourse. I think a lot of the threads that are coming out from the panel thus far is how these efforts are coordinated. They're not accidental. And they're based and steeped in old forms of knowledge and old approaches towards erasure of women's voices, erasure of women in queer spaces. And I think that there's a lot of knowledge to be gained by looking into our own history as feminist activists. The mothers, sisters, leaders, feminists of yesterday, when there was no digital approaches to coordinating, when there was no WhatsApp platform, when there was no internet, they still built movements. They still gathered. They still fought against systems of patriarchy. And so, for me, online gender-based violence has been a very fascinating experience in my research and in my approaches. And I can see that gender disinformation is just another form of online gender-based violence. That spread of false or misleading gender-based narratives against women, oftentimes with the coordination that we've talked about. It exploits existing gender stereotypes and societal biases. We have seen already that there's a disproportionate targeting of women, especially those in public spaces. Politicians, journalists, activists, and other public figures. And we also see that intersectionality plays a role. So all of those threads that we've talked about in our other work, they come to bear here as well. So Black women, LGBTQ plus individuals face compounded attacks. I have a few recent examples of these kinds of campaigns across the African context, and I know that many of you will have more examples to share that perhaps haven't been documented or shared. In South Africa, we saw that women politicians were being attacked during their 2024 elections. There's the case of Estella Ndabeni Abrahams, who was targeted with false claims about misuses of funds, old and debunked stories that were recirculated to discredit her. And these narratives persist even years after having been disproven. So as Rosebell was talking about, there's no facts behind some of these targeted attacks, but they still gain popularity and they are spread by a machine that is working as it is meant to work. In Nigeria, we saw coordinated attacks of the women journalists and activists, coordinated trolling campaigns against women, reporting on the NSARS protests. Women journalists faced rape threats and doxing. And this has a chilling effect on the coverage of important societal issues. In Kenya, sexualized disinformation targeting women candidates, the 2022 election saw widespread use of doctored intimate images of women politicians. Deep fake technologies we now see are being used to create false and compromising images. And there's a psychological toll on the candidates, on their families, and on people who would want to go into politics. You know, we cheered extra loud when hearing that Fatu is in politics, because we know just how dangerous that space can be. I really wanted to talk about how these approaches are old. You know, they seem like new, but they're actually very old. There's a legacy of colonialism and post-colonial struggles in what we see today. And to just draw some very specific examples, we see a lot of infantilization and delegitimization. In the colonial context, that was portraying African women as being childlike, uneducated, or incapable of political thought or leadership. And now, that represents as gender disinformation campaigns that question women politicians, suggesting that perhaps they're not as educated as their male counterparts. How about the hypersexualization and the moral policing that we saw in the colonial context? So there would be European notions of what it means to be a proper woman and to be properly feminine, and what sexuality should be amongst African women. Nowadays, we see that there's the spreading of doctored images or false sexual rumors about women in public life, false sexual rumors about queerhood, about gender identities. So for example, the fake nude photos of women that were circulated during Kenya's 2022 elections. And then again, we see that effort of the colonial machinery to divide and conquer. So pitting different ethnic groups or social groups against each other to prevent unified resistance. It's the more things change, the more they stay the same. And now we see that there's a use of social media to amplify divisions between different feminist groups or generations. And that brings me back to my point about the need for us to reach across the generations, because there's knowledge amongst us. There's knowledge amongst the young, there's knowledge amongst the older generations of feminists on how to survive what we're going through today. Yesterday's problems are today's problems, but just with a new face. And the resilience that our mothers and our foremothers had, we have that in us too. We just need to figure out new strategies to fight against what is an old problem, wearing new clothes. And then lastly, erasure and silencing. The colonial project systematically excluded women from official histories and records of anti-colonial struggles. They erased us from the history books. But right now we see that there's a use of coordinated online attacks to drive women out of digital spaces, forcing us to erase ourselves. Harassment campaigns against women journalists who cover political issues. These kinds of campaigns lead to self-censorship, where we feel that it is not safe for ourselves, for our families, for us to be in the public space and to take on those very public roles. And that is the impact of gender disinformation and misinformation. By understanding these historical parallels, we can better recognize the deep-rooted nature of the challenges that we face today. And this awareness will allow us to draw on the resilience and the strategies of past generations of African feminists in our current digital strategies. Thank you, Rosebell.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarai. As Sarai was talking, I was reminded of the story worked on from Malawi, a case of gender disinformation. And it comes in different ways. And in this case, it was at a university. And somebody exposed a list of names and phone numbers of young university girls, that this is the list of, you know, girls who are, what was the right? Available on campus. You see, like available, right? So you could call them, the men could call them, any man could have that list. That list was circulating in WhatsApp groups, right? Or of the whole country, literally, right? So one young girl we interviewed, a university girl, she woke up, it was a normal day, she's going to university, and she found so many missed calls on her number, and she did not have a clue what this was about. She's trying to go to university, and everybody's looking at her. Can you imagine? You wake up from, you don't know even how your name. Now the list became national, Men from all over were calling these girls. And this led, it was really a mental health breakdown for most of these girls because their families saw the list. You could not say, oh, I'm not involved, putting doubt on them. It was a very big nightmare. So we see a lot of doxing. We see it's very intentional to really target women and young women and queer people to drive them even out of university because many of the girls dropped out of university. Imagine. Because you can't handle that. Everybody's sharing your number is public, and even when she changed numbers, somehow people would still find her. It was a nightmare. So we have to see that there are real, different tactics and real lives being impacted in different countries. I wanted to share that. Then also, Sarai, you were touching very deeply on how, as African women, Black women, intersectional realities. You could have the same panel in any part of the world, but the realities of Africa, our colonial history, the continued neo-colonization, and that affects us daily. It makes our journey to liberation really, really long. So the internet freedom imaginations and dreams are really still far because, we situate our realities in this continent and what the continent is going through and what it has gone through, its history, And oftentimes we are erased at the different discourse. So I wanted to jump from our main panel, actually, if I could get us a mic, We still have speakers, as you can see. So we have our other esteemed speakers that we'll be hearing from. We'd like to hear from Sophie Mane. Sophie Mane is a young feminist and the founder and national coordinator of Safe Spaces for Girls. And this is a young women-led, female-led organization from the Gambia. She's currently the program officer at the National Youth Parliament in the Gambia. I don't know if you have followed news from the Gambia lately. The Gambian women and activists have been fighting tooth and nail because their parliament and religious leaders woke up and decided we need to remove the ban on the ban on genital mutilation. They said we need to bring back this shit. Can you imagine? Like after generations of fighting and getting the law in order, fighting a dictatorship at the same time and getting yourself that law in place and slowly trying to do some protections for young girls to not be subjected to genital mutilation in a country where over 70% of the women have experienced this, heinous crime. But 2024, your parliament, working with religious leaders, trying to bring back, to remove the law and the protections. So that's the fight Gambian women have been going through. Very, very personal fight. Very, an undignifying kind of fight. Nobody wants to be there discussing their body in parliament on display by a parliament that is over 90% men, right? So, Sophie, you have the floor. Please tell us how then that fight has gone in the relation to disinformation and how you have organized online to fight back.
Right.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone. As she mentioned, I am Sophie Mane, the founder of Safe Space for Girls in the Gambia. For me personally, I love to start with saying that because of the internet, the fight against FGM was not a lonely fight for the feminist movement, but also because of the internet, it was a very challenging fight for us and our movement. As you may know, the law for FGM was enacted in 2015 by the former President Yahya Jammeh. And for us, we thought it was more like just ticking the box because the law was not implemented. No conviction happened, no prosecution. And in 2023, we had the first prosecution, which was 8 years after the law was enacted. For us, we thought it was time to celebrate. It was time to say, oh yeah, we're putting the law into practice. But unfortunately, it was the beginning of a nightmare for a lot of women, for a lot of human rights defenders. Because 2 women were convicted, and unfortunately, we had religious extremists that came and said, you cannot arrest our murders. So they had to bail them out, And we organize ourselves as young feminists, as feminist groups and other human rights activists to say, you know what, I think we should call on the government to say, this law should be there and it should not be bailable. And because they didn't even, the law says you should arrest them for 3 years and then $50,000 is to be charged, and then the judge actually just didn't go by the law. So for us, we thought they should implement the law as it is written. That was our goal. But unfortunately, we just heard news that the parliament wants to have an extraordinary session to have a matter of the day because they wanted to repeal the law. So now, instead of calling on the Justice Ministry to say, you know what, I think you guys should have gone by what is written in the law, now the whole advocacy is shifted to the parliament to say, why do you want to repeal the law that is here protecting women and girls against FGMC? And we had to reorganize ourselves again to say, what are we going to do? There were no funds, there were nothing. So what we had at the moment was the internet. What we had at the moment was social media to say, we need to make sure we make noise around the social media. We tried to meet our government officials, but unfortunately, some of them were not very, very responsive. They didn't want to listen to us. So we said, okay, you know what? Let's go to the media. We started making the noise. We started having hashtags. We started calling on international, bodies as well. And I would say this has helped us a lot because our government listened to the international bodies and not the citizens of the Gambia, and not women, and not survivors. So to just talk about the misinformation and disinformation that happened, the threats are there, but we saw how extremists actually moved the whole conversation from female genital mutilation to say, you know what, we're not fighting female genital mutilation, we're fighting feminists. We're fighting human rights activists, because what they want to do is to destroy our traditions, our culture. What they want to do is to fight Islam. You know what? If you guys remove this law, it means they're going to now promote homosexuality. So now, a conservative community like the Gambia, so everyone said, no, we're not going to promote homosexuality. So it's more like we're trying to fight against homophobia. We're still trying to fight against people saying that, we need to mutilate their body. And another misinformation that came forward was people saying, you know what, all the data that they had was from the West. It's not in the Gambia. Other people say, no, you know what, in the Gambia we don't do mutilation, we do circumcision. So it was a lot of misinformation happening, and then we need to come to, re-strategize, because we were having several meetings to say, now we have to come and, make sure we fact-check this particular information and say, this is what the right thing is. But at some point, people were not even listening to us, because now they say we're being Islamophobic. We mobilize ourselves to go down to communities to speak to people. They don't want to listen to us. Some of us were even chased out of some of these communities. On the internet, we had people that were bullied, that were threatened, that were actually, other people were even sexualized online. So we tried to have some survivors come up online to talk about the consequences that they had to face, because we wanted people to see the light. And we saw how these people were also demoralized. People just came and said, you should be ashamed. You're a woman. You should not be talking about your body in the internet. You should not be doing this. So we said, okay, now you know what? This is not safe for survivors. Let's put survivors aside. So we started going on the internet to say, let's find other means to make sure people see the light. We used AIs. We used other images that we could find. And then I think the internet actually helped a lot, because we had a lot of other young people that actually saw the light, and these are people that we targeted online, because at some point the communities was like a no-go area, because we go to communities, talk to them. When we leave, we have the Islamic people go back to them and talk to them. They have their Juma prayers, they talk to them and say, don't listen to these people, they want to fight Islam, they want to do this and that. So for us, it was a challenge, right? And then now we said, you know what, let's leave the communities, let's make sure the law stays, and then after we achieve this particular goal, then we can go back to the communities to educate them. Now our target was the National Assembly members, our members of parliament. You speak to some of them, they kind of want favors, other favors, to say, oh yeah,
I'm an MP, you need me, so you're gonna do this for me to be able to support you. So it was difficult for some of us. Some of them were very forthcoming, very helpful, but it was difficult, especially with the women, the few women that we have. They're just 5 out of 53. Some of them were so vocal. They're like, we're not gonna listen to these women because I am circumcised and nothing has happened to me. So they're just lying. They're just doing this for the money. They're just doing this. But the funny thing is, these people didn't listen to Gambian women. But when we said, you know what, another strategy that we can do is to speak to the embassies to make sure they have a visa sanction on these members of parliament, they started listening. So to me, I don't like celebrating the MPs. The law is still there. I don't like celebrating them because most of them did not do this for Gambian women. They did it for their pockets. They did this because they didn't want the visa sanctions. The government of the Gambia, the president, they didn't want to listen to us. They listened because the media was watching. Everyone was watching to say, if this law is out, you guys are not going to have money, you're not going to have anything. So for me, talking about the whole thing as a survivor, but also an activist, and also someone that has experience, because I was a nurse as well, had experience with people that face this, it's usually a very difficult thing to actually talk about. So when the law was, maintained, I said I was going to take a break, to not talk about FGM because it was a very difficult moment for us in the Gambia. And to just say, the country, our policymakers, they really failed us. And to just say the international community are the reason why we still have the FGMC law in the Gambia. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sophie. And we are so proud of the Gambian women. We are cheering you online, sharing everything and making sure we also go into different international bodies, the African, ironically, the African Commission on People and Human Rights sits in Banjul, right? And a very important body, so we have to continue to stress the humanity of women should not be subjected to political debate, that's what it is, and the repercussions we see. So we'll move next quickly to Jamila. Jamila Abbas is a young feminist with experience in movement building. She's passionate about political theory, about feminist Islam, anarchism, and black feminism. As a Francophone programs lead at SHAVES, which is a very, she's committed to building a West African feminist movement with intersectional language and inclusive. Jamila, please share your experience. Jamila is here, right here. Jamila, please share your experience in terms of building Pan-African movement building, and as young feminists, what kind of experience have you witnessed or experienced with disinformation? Welcome.
Hi. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm going to look around here because the lights are a bit bothering me, but thank you to all the panelists also for their amazing input, and thank you, Sophie, for sharing that story as well about the Gambia. I think it's interesting that in these conversations we've centered so much of young people, and yet we see young people being at the forefront of social movements online, but yet we don't see them in tech spaces, creating the platforms, or creating the security systems or resources that we need to ensure that our social movements are safe and that our young activists are safe. So I think that's what I'm going to talk about. I think that the internet has provided us with great opportunities as young feminists, particularly in having conversations that would be harder to navigate in physical spaces, especially for gender minorities and gender diverse folks, that we have that veil, quote unquote, that exists online that we don't have in physical spaces. But then we also have a flip side to this where our conversations are more vulnerable online due to things such as doxing and phishing, which are tactics that government bodies employ often to surveil and arrest young activists online. And I think that our online spaces need two things, have two problems. The problem is twofold. I think the first problem that we need to address is the lack of understanding of cybersecurity of young people, by young people, and I think the second is also creating spaces for young people to have access to tech creation skills and tech cybersecurity skills as well. I think we need to be the ones creating the platforms, as Nancy highlighted very well. We know that these systems are created continuously to oppress us and to perpetrate the harmful systems that exist offline as well as online. So I think that as young activists being pioneers in tech creation is a really important facet of how we navigate the internet. And I think it's something that is not explored or funded enough. I think that programming around this is really important in this context, especially in the context of anti-right, on the rise of anti-rights recently. What did I want to say? And then I think one thing that we also have noticed as young activists is that activism can be quite lonely in our siloed ways of being activists. In our region, especially in West Africa, we have language barriers that are particularly difficult to navigate and contextual legal barriers that are difficult to navigate as well. I think the internet provides an amazing space for us to combat some of those barriers, but I think that there's also a sense online of individual engagement, and collective engagement can be sometimes lost in these larger movements. I think there's also this idea perpetuated online that care and resistance can be very personal. And so I think reframing that as care as being a collective resistance and a collective responsibility to one another and to our movements is really important. I think that as young activists, it's important that we make our spaces center wellness, each other's safety, and not only individual self-care, but our responsibility to one another on and offline. And that includes many things. Don't think we have time to get into that. And I also want to discuss something that I think we haven't addressed in this conversation, is also how many folks, young folks especially, although we are the primary users of the internet, many young folks are also excluded from online spaces. And what that means for activism as it's becoming increasingly digitized is that folks from rural areas particularly, and folks with less access to operational infrastructures that allow them to access the internet, are often being excluded from a lot of social movements. And I think that that's something that we ought to rethink, how we strategize movement building online, and how movement building online needs to also be reflected offline in a very comprehensive and in a way that creates a synergy. Because otherwise I think that the movement can be quite fragmented.
It's okay.
And so also while young people are the primary users of the internet, I think it's also important to understand how vulnerable we are to disinformation. I think that oftentimes young people look to the internet as their primary source of information, and we don't always fact check that with offline resources. So combating disinformation online is particularly important for young people who are using the internet to form their political identities, and creating spaces that tackle disinformation directly and that particularly target youth is quite important. And also creating those spaces online so that youth are less reliant on the internet as their primary resource for information. Although there is a generational interconnectedness of disinformation as well, I think a lot of older folks who maybe have less understanding of the internet are also particularly susceptible to disinformation online. So I think that's where it's also a responsibility for young people to come in and to provide that accurate information that we might have more access to due to our increased technological skills. I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Jamil Abbas. It is very important points you've raised. The fact that whether you're on the internet or off, disinformation continues. You don't have to be online to suffer disinformation. You can be offline and still suffer that, and reminding us of the digital divide. And of course, the digital divide replicates the gender pay gaps, the fact that women and other minorities in Africa still work in informal economy, underpaid, underemployed. All those things have an impact on who accesses the internet. How much time can you spend on the internet? What device can you access the internet from? I remember this joke, I think it's in Uganda where they say, there are people who buy the iPhone, but they don't have land. Of course, people's priorities are different, and that iPhone could maybe unlock the smartphone, iPhone representing a smartphone, right? That smartphone could unlock possibilities for that person, as we see young people using TikTok and other channels to really assert themselves, build community, but also build following and their talent, showcase their talent. So it's very, very important to realize that in a world where economics stack against us and against young people, that the internet also offers that. And that's why we need to protect and continue to advocate that they can be safe while using this internet. I want to move quickly because we're almost running out of our time. Quickly to Abra Rosalind, who is a regional lead Francophone country for Purposeful. Would like to hear from Rosalind, but also from Togo. Yeah, she's going to tell us about feminist organizing in the digital world and how it's reflecting in Togo, but also as coming from a funding organization of young feminist movement on the continent. How are you responding to the emerging issues of disinformation and misinformation? Welcome, Rosalind.
Thank you a lot, Rosebel. I will be speaking in French, so maybe people who need translation can put their headsets. Donc merci. Je voulais commencer par remercier toutes les féministes ici présentes et vous envoyer beaucoup d'amour parce que j'adore toujours être dans des espaces féministes. Il y a toujours cette énergie encourageante, stimulante qui est là et je la ressens depuis le début de cette session. Et donc j'aimerais beaucoup remercier les féministes et les activistes ici présents. Et je voulais aussi ajouter que bien que le féminisme fait partie des meilleures choses qui me soient arrivées dans la vie, ça fait aussi partie un peu des choses, pas que je regrette, mais qui me dérangent un peu parce que depuis que je suis féministe, j'ai cette loupe-là qui fait que je ne peux plus apprécier un film, je ne peux plus apprécier une blague, ce qu'ils appellent une blague, ou je ne peux plus apprécier certaines situations parce que je vois au-delà de ce qui se passe réellement et je sais que ce sont des abus qui se passent, je sais que ce sont des dynamiques de pouvoir qui s'y passent, je sais que ce sont des systèmes d'oppression qui sont en train d'être mis à l'œuvre. Et donc c'est assez dérangeant, mais je pense que de la même manière, c'est pour ça aussi qu'il y a autant d'initiatives qui essaient de nous réduire au silence, parce qu'ils ont sûrement peur que plus de personnes se rendent compte que ce qui se passe, ce n'est pas juste des situations, ce n'est pas juste de la culture, ce n'est pas juste des blagues, mais que c'est des systèmes d'oppression contre lesquels nous tous, nous devons nous lever et combattre. Et donc, parlant des féministes du Togo, nous avons premièrement cette difficulté-là par rapport à l'identité féministe au Togo. Parce que si je prends par exemple le groupe des négresses féministes dont je fais partie, qui est un collectif de personnes qui se reconnaissent féministes, et on est pratiquement 42, mais à peine 10 sont actifs en ligne, précisément parce qu'il y a cette grande désinformation par rapport à ce qu'est un féministe ou ce qu'est un féministe ou ce qu'est le féminisme et ce qu'il ne l'est pas. Et donc on a plus de non-féministes qui parlent du féminisme que les féministes elles-mêmes, ce qui fait que peu de personnes ou peu d'activistes arrivent ou ont le courage de s'affirmer en ligne comme étant féministes. Alors que nous, dans notre mouvement, les négresses féministes, c'est plus par rapport aux prises de position des personnes en ligne ou peut-être dans des espaces auxquels on participe, qu'on les invite à rejoindre le mouvement. Et donc là, déjà ça réduit l'organisation des féministes en ligne, ou ça nous empêche, ça réduit nos chances de pouvoir détecter et de pouvoir exprimer nos points de vue féministes en ligne, parce que les gens ont cette idée, ce stéréotype de ce qu'est le féminisme ou pas. Et pour répondre à cette situation, nous avons lancé depuis l'année 2023 une initiative que nous appelons Let's Jump into Feminism, que nous adressons aux activistes qui ne sont pas très sûrs de leur position ou qui veulent être féministes, mais ne sont pas très sûrs de ce que le féminisme est ou n'est pas. Et donc cet espace-là, c'est vraiment pour eux, pas pour les anti-féministes, pas pour les anti-droits, mais pour les personnes qui sont curieuses. Et dans cet espace-là, nous discutons de la tradition, de la culture africaine, de la religion, et de comment est-ce que même nos ancêtres africains étaient même plus féministes que nous le sommes actuellement. Les victoires qui ont été acquises par des personnes un peu plus âgées, ou en tout cas nos défensières, qui ont utilisé des principes féministes pour pouvoir acquérir certaines victoires, que ce soit en politique ou en économie dans notre pays. Et généralement, nous avons de très grands succès lors de cet événement-là. Sur le dernier où nous avons, où nous avons organisé, on avait 30 participants et au bout de la discussion, 28 étaient prêts à s'affirmer féministes et étaient prêts à continuer par acquérir des nouvelles connaissances sur ce que c'est le féminisme et s'engager un peu plus sur notre lutte. Et je vais finir avec le cas, un exemple de comment est-ce que la mauvaise information, ou en tout cas les fake news, ont failli coûter la liberté à une de nos sœurs. Et donc, elle a publié une vidéo en face du siège du parti public, du parti politique qui est au pouvoir actuellement dans notre pays. Et elle a été mise en garde à vue pendant plus de 10 jours, juste à cause de cette vidéo-là. 10 jours où elle n'a pas pu voir ni ses enfants, ni sa famille, ni personne. Elle n'a même pas pu se laver pendant ces 10 jours-là. Ou juste à cause d'une vidéo qu'elle a publiée devant le siège du parti politique au pouvoir. Et nous nous sommes vraiment organisés en ligne, pour pouvoir contrer les fake news qui circulaient à cause de cette vidéo-là. Il y avait le contenu de la vidéo, mais les gens ne prenaient pas le temps d'aller voir le contenu et partaient juste sur la base de ce que d'autres plateformes en ligne ont publié sur ce qu'elle aurait potentiellement dit dans cette vidéo-là. Donc nous sommes organisés d'abord pour établir la vérité, donc pour dire que, bon voilà, prenez 2 minutes pour regarder la vidéo, et ce n'est pas ce qu'elle a dit. Organisés d'abord aussi pour montrer au système judiciaire que nous sommes au courant de l'affaire, parce que malheureusement au Togo, la justice, je dirais qu'elle ne nous sert pas trop. Surtout quand tu es dans cette position où tu essaies de rendre redevables les ministres ou les députés, ou en tout cas les policy makers. Et donc, dès que tu oses parler d'un sujet ou en tout cas d'un sujet que tu penses que le gouvernement ne gère pas bien, tu es la cible. Donc il y a ça, et en plus d'être féministe. Donc nous avons essayé de aussi mobiliser plusieurs acteurs pour pouvoir faire comprendre que nous sommes au courant de l'affaire, nous sommes au courant des jeux qui se passent autour de l'affaire, et nous savons que ce n'est pas juste à cause de cette vidéo-là, mais parce qu'elle était, dans le collimateur de certains pontes du pouvoir depuis un certain moment et tout. Et tout ça, pour nous, a contribué à ce que finalement, on ait pu la relâcher à la fin. Donc c'est important d'utiliser ce même Internet qu'on essaie d'utiliser pour nous oppresser. C'est important pour nous, féministes, de nous organiser aussi avec ce même Internet-là pour pouvoir mettre en place nos stratégies pour nous protéger. Et dans ce cas-là, quand nous avons essayé de nous renseigner sur la personne qui est derrière le fait que notre ami soit mis en garde à vue, on nous a dit que c'est une procureure qui s'est auto-saisie de l'affaire parce que selon elle, la vidéo ne respectait pas telle règle. Et pourtant, il y a plus de 10 jours, il y a une affaire actuellement dans notre pays où il y a une fille de moins de 5 ans qui a été violée dans une école, et la procureure ne s'est toujours pas auto-saisie. Et donc, nous allons utiliser ce même Internet-là pour appeler cette procureure-là pour s'auto-saisir de l'affaire, parce que voilà quoi, une petite fille de 5 ans qui est violée devrait normalement faire plus bouger le système judiciaire qu'une vidéo qui est publiée devant le chef du parti au pouvoir. Et maintenant, je laisse un peu mon activisme de côté pour parler de mon boulot. Donc, je travaille à Purposeful, et comme tu l'as dit, nous sommes dans la catégorie des financeurs. Et pour nous, ce nouveau monde, ou ce nouveau cyberespace où il y a beaucoup de désinformation et de fake news qui passent, et du fait que nos partenaires, ou en tout cas les personnes avec lesquelles nous travaillons, font partie ou sont dans cet espace-là et sont à des risques, ou font face à des risques de sécurité, que ce soit la sécurité de leur initiative ou de leur propre personne, fait que nous considérons, nous sommes un peu plus sensibles à comment nous protégeons non seulement les données de nos partenaires, mais aussi les données de notre staff. Donc, nous sommes conscients de la sensibilité du travail de nos partenaires, et nous essayons de faire, d'avoir un équilibre entre cette sensibilité-là et aussi la nécessité pour eux de participer à des espaces stratégiques, d'être peut-être un peu plus connus et d'avoir accès à d'autres ressources techniques et financières à part les nôtres. Nous réfléchissons beaucoup aussi à comment nous pouvons être intentionnels dans notre manière de financer ces organisations-là, par exemple d'avoir des fonds un peu plus flexibles parce que quand on parle de menaces en ligne ou quand on parle de dangers en ligne, ça ne prévient pas avant d'arriver et ça peut arriver tout d'un coup. Les organisations peuvent avoir urgemment besoin de fonds. Et donc nous sommes en train aussi de revoir nos processus. Déjà que nous sommes déjà un fonds flexible, mais nous reverrons encore plus nos processus pour être plus flexibles et plus rapides quand ces genres de situations arrivent, afin d'être capable de répondre en temps et à l'heure face à certaines urgences comme ça. Et peut-être pour finir, nous reconnaissons aussi la nécessité de financer des espaces où des féministes peuvent se retrouver et stratégiser ensemble et échanger comment est-ce qu'ils ont réussi, par exemple en Gambie, à faire repousser le ban sur la loi qui interdit les FJM, désolé, le français et l'anglais, la ça me mélange. Et par exemple, comment est-ce que les féministes au Kenya ont pu mobiliser non seulement les activistes féministes, mais d'autres personnes de la population pour pouvoir contrer la loi sur la finance qui devrait être passée, etc. Donc nous reconnaissons la nécessité de financer ces espaces-là pour que, au même titre que les mouvements anti-droit, que nous savons sont bien coordonnés, et ont des stratégies claires pour pouvoir repousser nos actions, c'est nécessaire aussi que les mouvements féministes puissent être aussi très bien coordonnés et puissent avoir le financement nécessaire pour pouvoir contrer ces mouvements anti-droit-là. Donc je vais m'arrêter là à cause du temps et merci beaucoup pour cet espace-là.
Thank you so much, Rosalind, for that great input. And it's very important that we see funding that is flexible and understanding that swift changing realities for young people on this continent, that they can also tap into that and be fully to respond, because we can pledge our voices, our bodies on the line, but ultimately if someone is funding very big, giant rights movement to take away our rights, we cannot win with just only our voices. It's not going to work. So continue the hard work you're doing. So we are a bit running over our session, but I wanted to hear a few comments before coming back to our panel to close. So if anyone has a question on all these brilliant presentations that have been made, feel free, feel free. Yes, Nadine Kampire is a young feminist from DRC, and we really would like to hear from you because we are in solidarity with the people of Eastern DRC. You're welcome, Nadine.
Merci beaucoup, je vais parler en français. Si vous pouvez installer vos casques.
Translation. Go ahead, Kampire.
Merci. Merci de nous avoir réunis. Nous avons eu des discussions vraiment enrichissantes. Et je vais essayer de parler du cas de la RDC parce que vous savez ce qui se passe dans ma région. Je suis de l'Est, du Nord Kivu, là où précisément se passe la guerre du M23. Nous sommes aussi dans un pays où la répression est vraiment à un niveau élevé, surtout envers les femmes. Vous savez que depuis la guerre, le ministère de la Communication a pu interdire aux journalistes d'essayer de communiquer sur la guerre pour des raisons de sécurité. Et donc les activistes et femmes journalistes sont plus visés, surtout en ce qui concerne la guerre et autre chose. Il y a quelques cas à Goma de journalistes et femmes qui se sont vus menacés par les pouvoirs en place, leur demandant de ne pas relayer la bonne information sur la guerre, ce qui cause la désinformation, mais aussi la propagation de beaucoup de discours de haine.
quelle méthode a été utilisée par ces oppresseurs? Il disait à ces femmes, si elles osent continuer à partager l'information, elles vont voir leurs nudes sur les réseaux. Malheureusement, il a été victime de ces menaces. On a créé une fausse vidéo où on a mis son visage et on lui a partagé ça. On a partagé ça aussi en ligne. Et vous comprenez que c'est le début de l'autocensure pour les femmes journalistes et les activistes. Alors, de peur d'être vues sur les réseaux, de voir ces images de nudité sur les réseaux sociaux, beaucoup de femmes journalistes et beaucoup d'activistes ont choisi de se taire. Mais aussi, à part ces menaces réelles, il y a aussi les questions liées à la sécurité numérique. Nous avons une loi au Congo qui malheureusement n'est pas suivie à la lettre et ceux qui sont censés faire communiquer sur cette loi ne sont pas plus informés sur les questions liées au numérique. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'il faudra faire pour les femmes qui n'ont pas assez de connaissances sur l'utilisation des réseaux sociaux, parce que il y a ces gaps déjà entre les utilisateurs masculins et les utilisateurs féminins des réseaux sociaux qui sont liés soit aux coutumes. Certaines coutumes demandent aux femmes de ne pas trop être sur les téléphones, contrairement aux hommes. Et le peu de femmes qui utilisent les réseaux sociaux ne les utilisent pas à bon escient. Et donc, elles produisent des contenus qui ne sont pas vraiment utiles pour eux. Et les notions de la sécurité numérique sont un peu non connues des femmes congolaises. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'il faudra faire pour la femme congolaise, pour l'activiste congolaise, pour les journalistes congolais? Je crois qu'en tant que féministe africaine, on doit se baser sur ces questions en voyant les réalités de chaque pays, parce que les avancées qu'ont les féministes au Kenya en termes de plaidoyer pour les femmes ne sont pas les mêmes pour les féministes congolais. Alors je crois qu'il faudra plus se baser sur la spécificité de chaque pays pour essayer de faire nos plaidoyers. Merci.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kampire. It's very important to reflect on the different realities, especially for African women feminists working and surviving the war, like in DRC, like in Sudan. We've seen stories of how the digital is being used by, non-state actors like Rapid Defense Forces, right? RF, whatever it is. Yeah, RSF, yes, in Sudan. And they've been sharing videos of their fighters raping women. You can imagine. That in a society where, on top of that, like that has been driving a lot of course, mental health, suicide. It's a whole added layer to how women try to survive, and then how the internet adds another layer of lack of safety when you're in the war. Beyond the physical experience of that, how the war is played to the world arena on what they are doing to the bodies of women. So thank you so much for reminding us of that. Yes, who has the mic?
I promise it won't be a comment that's a question, or a question that's a comment. I mean, I noted with concern a few months ago when there was some research that found on TikTok that it takes about 3 videos for TikTok to determine the gender of the person who's scrolling, and particularly for young men to be fed the Andrew Tate type content of the world. And we also know that part of the reason that the far right has been successful is because the Christian far right in the United States of America has been giving unrestricted core funding to religious far right groups in Africa for over 20 years. And I know the temptation is there for us to create these spaces of safety. But how do you imagine us safely seeking algorithmic justice? And how do we hold our funded spaces to greater sustainable accountability so that we're also not distracted by narrative reports when we need to do the work of narrative justice as well, and algorithmic justice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I wanted to jump back to Lara. Omo Lara had something to say from Liberation Alliance, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Roosevelt, and what a joy to hang out with feminists and think about really, I didn't expect the experience here to be so overwhelming, but all the things that we've been sharing just leads us back to a place of reflection and just maybe appreciating with fresh eyes the intellectual, mental, psychological, and epistemic imperialism that we are up against. Because at the end of the day, the job of disinformation, one of the things that disinformation does is to corrupt our consciousness. It is to punish us for being marginalized. It is to other us and push us further to the margins. But it also seeks to replace the things that we hold dear. It seeks to replace the things that we think about. And that leads me to a question around how then do we liberate ourselves if we are not even thinking the thoughts that are subjective to us? If our thoughts are, if we are experiencing ourselves in a colonial world as subsidiaries of Western power, as victims of colonial power consolidation, how then do we do the work of liberation that actually pushes us to the spaces that we need to be in? And then just hearing our governments, being not only complicit but also creating atmospheres of fear, of surveillance and all of that. I was just reading an article on Politico about the issue in Mozambique, and I'm actually a little bit shaken because then we see that we are not only up against imperialist influences and marginalization and punishment, we also now must begin to look critically at the role of African governments and leaders in these experiences. Is it that, and obviously these questions are rhetorical because we all experience it, we live these realities, but it continues to press upon my mind to think about why are our leaders moving in the direction of destruction? Why are we prioritizing profit over people? Why are we prioritizing capitalist gains and personal enrichment over, and obviously it's rhetorical because we experience these realities every day. And it just makes me go to the idea around, so organizing along the lines of kind of understanding that the warfare is primarily psychological, it is mental, it is spiritual, it is embodied. And so how do we kind of proceed from there? I'm so sorry for dumping all these questions on us, but those are the things that are kind of going through my mind. Thank you.
Comrade Omorara is always going to take us back to the challenge before us. So thank you for all that round to show us what we face. Is there any one last question that then we can come back to the panel because we need to respect the organization. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello everyone, my name is Rispa Arose. And thank you so much to our panelists for that good presentation. My question really is, currently we are working on a research on deepfakes as a tool for technology-facilitated gender-based violence. And we are looking at a case for Senegal, Namibia, and Ghana.
Sorry, whom do you work with?
Sorry?
You're saying we are. Who is doing the research?
It's a community network called Tanda Community Network. Yes. And the research, so one of the things that we are finding is there is really lack of awareness of
what this deepfakes is. And this is coming from women in politics and also journalists. And from what we know is, as technology evolves, the sophistication also is evolving. Right now, we are not talking about online gender-based violence, as we talked about it last year or the year before. So just to understand, are there interventions or strategies that you utilize, that are in place to also evolve with the technology as it's evolving? And if so, can you share? And also, what are some of the strategies you have in place to get use cases? Because also that's one thing we are facing challenges in, getting stories, getting cases on ground of victims who've been, or of survivors of this sort of violence, so that it really builds on to the strategies that can be used by other women in this space of leadership.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to move back to our panelists so we can close the session and also take care of the two questions that arose. Sarai, would you mind responding to the last question on strategies for online violence victims and how you reach out? And then Nancy will respond to the question that arose on algorithm justice and sustainability funding. How does that look like? Then I would come back to other panelists to close. If you can answer the questions and do a closing. Is it working?
Okay, thank you. A really important question, and one that actually called to my mind, something that I wanted to share with us earlier, and which is how many of the laws that have been developed supposedly to target and respond to online gender-based violence have actually been weaponized against particularly political dissidents, and then again across those lines of marginalization and feminism, women, queer people. We find that laws that talk about protecting somebody from online trolling will be used to target somebody who said something rude about the president. And this is a strategy and a trend that we're seeing across the border spaces. And yet when, as Rosebell mentioned that case that happened in Malawi, when those young women were brave enough to come forward and face the system and talk about their victimization and ask that the police act upon this, something that was already in the public space and in the public eye, the police refused to do anything, demanding instead that one victim put themselves forward and blow up their entire lives in order to take on this entire behemoth of a criminal justice system. And we know that the criminal justice system wipes people out. What I do realize, and I think what is very true for all of us, is that our laws are not nuanced enough to keep up with the rapid changes in digital technologies. But the violence that people experience is as old as time itself. We already have laws that criminalize violence. We already have laws that criminalize gender-based violence in many specific ways. And what we need to do is share that information amongst ourselves, share the strategies on how to use those laws to our protection, instead of the way that they're being used, which is to further our dehumanization, our delegitimization, and to really hide us in the space of the system. So there are strategies that we can share, and I think we can talk more about that beyond what this space, because obviously this is an opening and not an ending of a conversation. Feministing in Kenya, and there's so many platforms here that have been created to continue this conversation. We are just beginning. And then I just wanted to lastly call us to action. We need to embrace Pan-Africanism. We need to work hard to avoid the divisions that are trying to be sowed amongst us. Every time when we're being told how different we are, that's just to waste our time, to distract us. You know, Sophie was talking earlier about how suddenly they'll be turned to talk about homosexuality instead of the reality of the challenges that they were facing, or how your victimhood is then used against you, or how if you come forward and talk about how you experienced something, oftentimes with the laws the way that they're crafted so loosely, you could find yourself being imprisoned for being a part of an act where you were the victim. So I hope that one of the things that comes out of this is us really banding together and really sharing those online safe spaces. Again, what Jamila talked about, the fact that so many are left out of these conversations because of their lack of access, that just brings me back to my original thing, that feminism predates the internet, it predates technology. We had ways of gathering, of sharing, of communicating, and of struggling together, and we just need to make sure that we're doing both. We're using the internet in ways that amplifies our voices, and we're ensuring that those voices that are hidden, that are erased, that are silenced, are also being given a place in the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarai. Nancy, please answer the question and close. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure I heard your question properly, but I'm going to try and respond to the sections that I had. On narrative justice, for me, I think that the strategy that we need to take as feminist activists is to stop speaking to ourselves only. We need to speak to everyone. And if you look at the tactic that anti-rights folks are using, they, as Roswell said, they're using emotions to get everybody. If you look at the way they talk about abortion, it's very emotional. Someone will tell you, stop killing babies. Of course, stop killing babies. You know, it's something that is very emotional. So I feel like feminist movements, we should curate our political education in a way that sways some people to our side. We should talk to everyone. There's an opportunity for us as feminists to sway more people to our side. There's some people who are neither feminists, neither are they inclined to the anti-rights group, but we can bring them to our side and build mass power from the way we curate feminist political education. But on feminist funding, for this one, I think I want to talk to feminist funders. Could you dare to be as bold as feminist activists? Could you dare to step into your power as a funder? Could you dare to see how anti-rights groups are funded and then think about how you fund feminist activists? We don't have a chance. If that's how you fund us, we literally don't have a chance. So for me, it's a call to funders to dare to be as bold as the feminist movements that they fund. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy. Fatou, do your closing.
Voilà. En fait, je voudrais juste dire qu'il y a deux choses déjà que je remarque. En tout cas, ici au Sénégal, il y a une pratique que les jeunes font de plus en plus. C'est à chaque fois qu'on voit une personne qui dérange un tout petit peu, un groupe de personnes décide de lui accorder 72 heures. C'est-à-dire, ils vont faire passer la personne 72 heures où ces jeunes-là vont aller sur tous ces réseaux, vont l'harceler, vont créer des informations, vont faire des collages pour la faire taire. Donc c'est vraiment une menace qui pèse sur nous toutes en fait, parce que quand on dit des choses qui ne plaisent pas forcément l'opinion, on s'attend toutes à avoir des 72 heures. Mais ce qui est aussi clair, ce qui est bien à notifier est que je vois aussi la solidarité qu'il y a sur ces plateformes-là entre les féministes. Ce qui s'est passé en Gambie, par exemple, toutes les féministes de toute l'Afrique, au Sénégal, un peu partout, je ne vais pas citer, se sont solidarisées pour signer des pétitions, pour occuper l'espace, pour donner de la visibilisation. Je peux aussi citer l'exemple de Balance ton Saïsa. Ici, à un moment donné, on a encouragé les survivantes de violences à dénoncer les violences. Donc, pour dire que si on est solidaire, si on s'accroche, si on est solidaire, si on arrive à partager où que l'on puisse être les mêmes luttes, on peut avoir gain de cause, tout en sachant, tout en étant aussi préparé qu'un groupe de personnes peut à tout moment se lever et décider de nous attaquer, et que si ça arrive aussi, peut-être, en termes de perspective, il faudrait peut-être réfléchir sur comment prendre en charge cette chose-là et comment aider aux survivantes de mieux gérer les situations. Mais c'est vraiment une menace qui pèse sur nous, car à ce moment ou à n'importe quel moment, les gens peuvent se lever et créer des informations fausses sur notre profil et tout ça. Donc comment gérer ça, comment créer des espaces aussi de guérison et de discussion, c'est ça que j'aimerais lancer en termes de perspective et de réflexion, mais aussi dire que ces genres d'espaces aussi sont hyper importants. C'est pour ça que l'initiative que peut-être Feminist in Kenya a pris en organisant cet espace ici est important, parce qu'il faut aussi qu'on puisse, nous, en tant que féministes, investir ces genres d'espaces-là. C'est hyper bien de créer nos espaces à nous, mais aussi de nous imposer dans d'autres espaces, de poser le débat, parce que si c'est devant nous, personne ne le fera à notre place. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Fatou. Henda.
Yeah, I would like to say that at the end, we really need now to politicize our fights and bring our feminist fights in the heart of the politics and consider feminist movement as anti-racist, anti-capitalist, anti-sexist movement. And it means it's a worker movement. It's about social justice. It's not only about identity. It's not only about interpersonal relationships. It's also about the structures, about the power, and it is the only way, I think, to step further and go to new alliances as feminists.
Thank you so much, Henda. Thank you, everyone, for this contribution. Everyone reminded us that this is not just a conversation about women's rights, but it's an indicative of how healthy our democracies are, or our countries are, how healthy our societies are. In the future of our societies can be really looked at the trajectory by looking at those who are pushed on the margins. The more people you're pushing on the margins, the longer our collective liberation as a continent is going to take. So it's very important that we continue to fight back, not only in our spaces, but in the main spaces. And even when they call us foreign agents, like in Uganda, we ask them, how about your 60% of your budget is foreign funded? Aren't you the primary foreign agent in a way? So we see these tactics to try to silence us, but it's very important that we remain firm. We need to see all the great feminist research that is happening, not stay on your tables in the small corners of feminist conversations, but to really share with the mainstream kind of organizing, human rights mainstream discourse, so that we see this push towards understanding the kind of knowledge and experiences that we have and that we bring to the shaping of how the internet can, be governed or also regulated within our various countries and indeed on the continent. And also we had something about, the use of values, the biggest stick in the house used against African women and queer people when they try to assert their rights and be heard. There's as if there's one African value, as if we are not over 2,000 unique people, ethnicities on this continent with various gender expressions and other expressions that we can rely on to empower ourselves. It's not always doomed, that we can look into the histories of our societies outside the colonial lens, and we find power in those histories to continue to use that power to challenge the government, to challenge the street, to challenge people in the families, to get back our power, to assert our rights. So it's very, very important. And it's important to know that we don't live in a culture museum. We are not in a museum. We are actually living, breathing culture as we go. Culture is not static. That we continue to challenge those narratives even as we fight with the mis and disinformation. That we continue to be in solidarity with everybody on this continent, particularly those whom the light and the media might keep away from us. So once again, we would be looking at situations in DRC, Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado, in other areas that, in the Sahel, that we continue to dare to find the people there and understand their struggle and how to reflect it back to the world and be in solidarity with them wherever we go, because that's what feminism is about. Thank you. We want to thank CPESA and all partners like Purposeful, AWDF for coming really quick and making sure that this conversation happened in CPESA, making sure that this conversation happens on the main stage, because oftentimes we come to meetings, we are also still pushed on the margins. So we are very grateful that you find our voices powerful and here to be given this platform, and we take it very seriously. Thank you everybody for participating. We are all on Hoover app. You can go there. If you have any question you wanted to ask a particular person, still stay in touch with us so that we can continue to exchange on this. We thank you for being a great audience. Thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of your conference. Yes. And you're welcome to, I currently live in Senegal, we are going to extend Teranga Spirit. So in the evening, you can join us and we have a good time. For being a good audience, come find me. Come find me. We are going to go out, because we are here for feminist joy. We are not only here for, small fights. We are here to also enjoy ourselves. So enjoy the Teranga spirit the rest of your time. Bye. Viva! Viva African feminists! Viva! Down with dictators. Power to the people. Power to the feminist joy we experienced today. Viva Africa, viva. Thank you.